And then
All right.
all right, Gedaly, I would say go and get started, and then I'll keep trying to help let people in and for the next few minutes, and then I'll make you host.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Welcome. Glad to see some people joining in from space or from home, wherever you're at. I'm Gedaly Guberek. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a Blackmagic Design trainer. I do some trainings for Blackmagic Design for companies around town. I teach at AFI um, for this kind of a thing. So we'll keep it informal. So feel free to unmute yourself as long as it's intentional and interrupt me with questions. That's totally cool. Otherwise, you can always use the chat and say hi. Would love to know before we really dive in what you're working on, what kind of projects you're doing, what types of effects, if any, you're most interested in learning, so we can at least talk about it. Um, and yeah, so hello. Again, feel free to unmute yourself and say hi, or say hi in the chat and let me know what you're interested in learning or what types of projects you work on, or just say hi.
Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm a producer. I'm an AD most of the time. I'm here today to kind of refresh myself on what Resolve has to offer in the way of VFX.
Cool.
Because
Thanks,
it's
Jordan.
been a while.
Yeah. Have you done any before?
A little bit, not in Resolve, but I used to use After Effects when I was, coming up film school.
Okay, cool.
This is Joy. Hello again from outer space.
Hi, Joy.
As the background might suggest, I'm working on a sci-fi short. I'm primarily a writer, actor, producer, more or less in that order. And I'm here to try to get some of the vocabulary. I won't be doing my own VFX. I'll be hiring someone, so I'll be listening to see what I might be vetting for. And also, since I'm writing the script or have the script what's going into production, if there are any aspects of the script that need adjusting, because of course I know that the words are more affordable than actual VFX maybe, or labor hours. I'm here to do that as well.
Cool, great. Yeah, understanding the principles of VFX, even if you're not doing them, is a huge help as a director or producer. Um, Anyone who's putting together a project, just because then you know how to communicate with people what you want, or just knowing what's possible is often good. So you can figure out how to shoot something, or at least who to talk to and how to ask what is possible. Danny's saying hi in the chat. Writer producer using Resolve for smaller editing projects. Did a sci-fi, excellent. Tracker removal, compositing on screens, basic masking, compositing, tracker remover. Okay, cool. Thanks, Danny, and thank you, Joy. Anyone else want to say hi? Either unmute or post in the chat. Just let me know what you're working on, what you're most interested in learning.
Hi, I'm Sean. Sean Kennedy. I think I met you, Gedaly, at the Blackmagic event like last week.
Yeah.
Um,
Hey, Sean.
hey, I'm a visual effects artist. I've been doing it for 25-ish years, and I actually used Fusion on Sin City back in 2004 or 5, whenever that was. But I haven't used it since, and I've tried to kind of stay on top of it. So I just wanted to kind of peek in and kind of refamiliarize myself with Fusion and all that, and see what's new with it, maybe, or
Cool.
see if I can even remember anything from it. So.
Great. Well, this is going to be very basic for you, but I think you'll notice that the interface has changed quite a bit.
Right on.
That's very cool. All right. Aldo's saying hi in the chat. Writer director, hire someone for CGI work, looking to see what's possible through Davinci with an oldish MacBook Pro. Yes. everything is possible. It just takes longer to render. You know, if you have a lower powered computer, but it's all here. The one of the cool things about Fusion in DaVinci Resolve is that all the features are there, and there are a few that are studio only, but you can do a lot with a program that is free or a one-time cost. So, very cool. All right. Anyone else? Feel free to just say hi in the chat. Let me know what you're interested in looking at. Actress, producer, director. Excellent. Thank you. Cool. All right. So I want to get into first overview of Fusion in DaVinci Resolve. I think we have a mix of skill levels and familiarity with Resolve. So overall, go into very basics of using Fusion, which is different from any other page in Resolve in that it is a node-based compositor. It is nodes are on the color page, but they work differently than they do in color. And then, of course, if you're used to doing effects, either just dragging effects over here from, you know, on the edit page or working in a timeline-based system and layers and like something After Effects, it's a different interface, it's a different way of working and thinking about what you're doing. So we'll get into those basics in just a moment. Let me add a little cursor so my mouse is easier to follow. There we go. Now I can draw and say, welcome. All right, I'll get into Fusion. So if you're familiar with DaVinci Resolve, you'll probably mostly see the edit page here. I'm in a timeline. I've got clips on my timeline. I have a bunch of pages at the bottom, and this is how we switch between the various interfaces that are available in Resolve. So I have a media page, I have a cut page, there's an edit page. You may be familiar with the color page, and I skipped over Fusion. I'll come back to that in a second. I've got Fairlight here for editing audio and Deliver at the bottom for rendering out my video and creating file, delivering that to whatever format I need. But in the middle here, I've got this tab with this magic wand. If you're used to seeing some words below it, there we go. That's that. So just as a quick tip, you can give yourself a little more screen real estate if you need it by right-clicking in this bottom bar and saying Show Icons Only, and that gives me a little more room for either my timeline or any other page that I'm working on. In Fusion, there are a couple ways to get into it. If I hover over any clip and I click on Fusion, it will open that clip in Fusion, and now I have a totally different interface than what you may be used to seeing in the edit page or color page or anything like that. Jordan is asking, are we able to download the project files to follow along? Not at the moment, but I'd say just watch and learn, follow along as best you can to understand the general concepts. You are free to open up any static image and just poke around in Fusion if that's helpful, but otherwise I'd say just watch and learn. Aldo, check your Zoom settings. I am sharing my screen, so see if it's popped up in another window or change your view settings. All right, so here, Fusion. I've got a couple different parts of the interface I want to explore first. So in the upper corners, I have a bunch of controls for opening and closing panels. This is similar to any other screen in Resolve where I have a media pool, for example, where I have access to all my media in a project. I have an effects area, which is similar to what I have on the edit page, but I have a lot more tools here available, all the types of tools and effects and different nodes I can be using. I have a clips panel that I can open and close to bounce between clips that are on my timeline. Although you can also easily just switch back to the edit page, move your playhead, and then switch back to Fusion to change which clip you are on. And I quickly shift between these different pages by using the keyboard shortcut. Shift 4 is to get to edit page, Shift 5 is to open Fusion, so I tend to use that. All right. There's this node panel area, which opens and closes this bottom node panel. That's where we tend to do a lot of our work in Fusion. I'll come back to it, but this is different than the nodes that are on the color page, but they are nodes. So something to keep in mind is that this whole area is a flowchart starting with our media in. So this is the clip that's in my timeline, and it's connected to the media out. So this is what goes back out to the ed page and beyond. Anything that happens in the middle here is my work, essentially. So I'll come back to how that goes in a moment. Here I've got two viewers by default. These viewers allow me to see anything I want. So unlike the edit page where you have a source viewer and a timeline viewer, I can set these to be whatever I want. So I have two viewers for the purpose of, let me give an example here. So I've got my media in one over here, so that's my clip as it starts, and then I can add an effect in between my media in and media out. So I'll show you how I do this later, but I've added a blur to this composition here, this composite, and then I can adjust that blur, and you see nothing is happening in this viewer because I'm currently viewing my media in one. So if I view media out in the other viewer, I can see the effect, the output that I'm creating here. So change that blur, and there we go. So you can see that in these viewers, I can view any part of my pipeline, any part of my composition that I'm doing here. And I can reverse these, so I can view media out in viewer number one and view my media in viewer number two. So this is a matter of preference and how you like to work. I tend to want to do my media out in viewer number two if I have two viewers. I can also just choose one of my viewers. So I've got this rectangle icon, and now I'm just seeing one viewer, and I add that to the viewer, and now I'm just working on a single viewer, much like I might do on the color page. We'll go into that a lot more shortly. A couple other items to look into. I have an inspector in the upper right corner here. So if I open and close that, that toggles this inspector. It's similar to the inspector that's on every other page. And what that allows me to do is click on a node, any effect that I'm working on, and open it up over here. So now I can adjust the parameters. In this case, the blur is selected, so the blur controls are showing up in my inspector here, and now I can adjust it as needed. I do have a couple other panels here, which I don't know that we'll get into too much today, but I have a spline editor and a keyframes editor. So this allows me to adjust the timing of, let's say, if I wanted to animate the blur to go from 0 to a lot of blur, I can both control that with keyframes in the inspector here, but I can also see where those keyframes are in this keyframes panel here and change how that's animated, adjust the position of those keyframes in time. This is probably the closest thing to After Effects view where you're viewing things mostly in a timeline. But mostly what we're focused on in Fusion is looking at things visually of this happens, then this happens, then goes here. And the spline editor is also another place to adjust keyframes, but I have more control over the shape of the transition between one keyframe and another, or any animations. I don't know that we'll have time to get into that today, but just know that that is there. If we do have time, we can go over it a little bit at the end. And then there's also this metadata viewer here, so I can, if I click on a clip, I can see the parameters, the metadata of a clip, so I can see in this case, this is an Apple ProRes clip. It's 24 frames a second. I can see the resolution. These may be useful if you don't know these things, but I tend to not worry about it in Fusion. It tends to be more of an editorial thing for me. So that's our basic interface. Let me show you. I'm going to go back to my edit page and add a new Fusion composition. So this is a totally blank Fusion. It's an effects here. So on the edit page, effects, toolbox, effects, Fusion composition. If this is something or any effects that you want to use often, you can click over here and add a star to any effect, and then it will show up in my favorites over here. And I use this one a lot because it's a blank placeholder basically, so that I can open this up in Fusion and I've got a totally blank composition that I can do anything I want to. If you're not starting with a piece of footage and you're, for example, adding text or creating something from a bunch of images, this is a good way to go. Normally, in a film, you'll probably be starting from a piece of footage that's in the timeline, but so this is just for demo purposes. I want to give you a sense of how nodes work and what Fusion is doing. All right, so I'm going to start with adding a node. So in my interface right here, I've got this toolbar, which I use sometimes, and this is one quick way to add various nodes to my composition here. Like I said, if you're familiar with the color page, the nodes there work differently in that the nodes on the color page are essentially empty containers, so you can add any sort of effect or operation to it. So you might be color grading. Let me actually just demo that real fast. If I'm over here in the color page and I see this node here, I can add just about any effect to it if I'm changing the color, if I'm changing the contrast of it. This node is a blank slate and I can do whatever I want to it. When I am in Fusion, let's go back to my blank composition here. In Fusion, every node is actually its own tool. It's not a blank container, but I have to choose the tool I want, and that is a node. For example, I'm going to add this background node, so I'm going to click here in my toolbar, and this background is just a solid color that you can use as a background. And you'll notice that nothing happened because I've not added it to my viewer. Now, if I hover over a node, you can see that there's a couple dots under it, and they're all black, meaning that none of them is added to the viewer. By default, there are two, but I have a separate reference monitor, so I have a third dot, but for most of you, you will see two dots here. If I have a viewer available and I click 1 on my keyboard while this is selected, that background goes to viewer number 1. If I had two viewers open, I can click on number 2 on my keyboard, and that now goes to viewer number 2. I think we'll just work with one viewer for now, so I'm going to click on that button over here and bring viewer 1 into the background into viewer number 1, and you can see in my inspector here, which is open, I have some controls where I can affect the color of this background, and I have a few other controls where I can adjust the color. Let's just choose something bright so we can see that it's active. So there we go. I have a background. And now if I go back to my edit page, you'll see that that image is not coming through. That orange background didn't come through. The reason for that is that I have not connected it to my media out. So I need to draw a line, a connection, to send the output of background 1 into media out. So I can do that by dragging, let me zoom in on this so we can see a little bit better. So the node itself has this little square, that is the output of the node, and if I click on it and drag it into this triangle on the media out node, those are now connected. And if I go back to my edit page, you can see now that image is coming through. The first problem that happens in Fusion, if it's not working, that's usually the first place to look. So making sure that the nodes are actually connected. It's very much like setting up a circuit board where everything needs to be connected. It's going into one thing into another. You can also think of it like an assembly line where this node right here is making a thing and it goes down the conveyor belt into the other thing that sends it back to the edit page. Now, the main thing a compositor does, Fusion being a node-based compositing tool, is it puts images together, usually in the form of one over another. So I've got one background here. If I create another background, let's make that green. And nothing is happening because I don't have this background in my viewer. So I'll click on it, hit 1 on my keyboard. That is bright. Change the color slightly. And now I've got my background number 2. And if I go to media out, I'm still seeing, the effect of background 1. It's going down this pipe. It's going to my media out. In order for this to come into the stream here, into my flow, into my conveyor belt in my image factory, I need to put this on top of that image. And the basic way that we do that is a merge node. That's this node right here. So I can add this merge node. I'll put that down here. And what I want to do is grab the output of the background, put that into the background input of my merge node. And then I put background number 2, this green, into the green input of the merge. And now I can connect that merge to my media out. And you can see I have started with the background that was yellow, and I created a green background, and I merged those together. You can see I can actually move this and see that the green is going on top of my yellow background. So green on top of yellow. The way I tend to remember this background is that the land is yellow, and then the plant on top is green. And that way I always know that my green is going on top of the yellow. We'll get into a more practical example of this in first, because this is fairly conceptual to start. The other control I have here is, because I'm just putting one image entirely on top of another, I can also control how much of that image is being added on top with my blue input here. So this is a mask. A mask is essentially a black and white image, or an alpha channel, that says how much of what I'm doing in this merge node is transparent. So I have this ellipse tool. I can create a circle. If I put that in my viewer, you can see it's just this circle black and white image here. And if I connect the output of that into my blue input on the merge, and now view this, we can see this background is being limited by this circle. So it's saying the blue input here is saying limit this merge to happen only inside of this circle, which is why now I see this green, my foreground, oops, is put on top of the blue. Sorry, put on top of the yellow background here and limited to the blue. We'll go into that on a actual footage example next. I think that might be easier to see, but this is conceptually what we're doing in Fusion, is putting a background and or having an image, putting another image on top, merging them together, and then occasionally limiting that with some shape to mask it out. And if you do have questions about any of this along the way, feel free to either interrupt me by taking yourself off mute or putting a question in the chat, and I'll keep my eye on that as we go. Let's go to some actual footage so you can see how we might use this in a film. All right, so I've got a piece of footage right here. This is from a short film, a sci-fi, and it's supposed to be, this character in the center is a robot man, and someone is trying to put a hard drive into Robot Man to reprogram him or something of that sort. And in the footage, there is no slot to do that. I have a bit of footage from a 3D artist. This right here that actually shows his backpack opening up and creating a few slots for a hard drive to be inserted into. So really what I'm doing in a composite here is that I'm taking my footage and I have this CG element and I want to put that on top. And then you can also see in my viewer here, I have, this checker background shows me that a lot of this is transparent, which means that it should go over top pretty easily. Let's look about how we can do that. So in order to put my background over my foreground, so background being the original footage, foreground being my new piece of footage here, my VFX plate, I can add a merge just to put one over the other. Here's a quick shortcut for how to add a merge if you know exactly what you want it to do. I can drag, let me zoom in on that, the output, that square of the thing I want on top, over the square output of my original footage, and it creates a merge automatically. And let me label these so it's clear what everything is. I'm hitting F2 on my keyboard to label, or you can also right-click on any node and select rename. So let's call this footage. I'm going to call this new pack, because that's his new backpack. And I've got the merge going over. So if I view that in my viewer, now we can see that the new CG bit has been put on top of my original footage. Thus far, pretty easy. I should say that a whole other artist has done this where they've tracked my piece of footage, they have generated a 3D model that does this, and then they've matched the motion of it. So you may be working with a team that can do that in your productions, you may not, but I think this is a good place to start of just showing we're putting a piece over our original footage. And now you can also see that this guy is putting the drive in there, and it's our new CG plate is covering up this guy's hands, which we don't want. We want that piece of footage to show through so we can see what he's doing. And I do have this other, this mat that was generated, some shapes that were drawn that corresponds with the motion of his hands and him inserting that drive. So I can use that to mask out, like we saw before, to limit my composite to not happen in this area. So I'll do that quickly, just so we can see the actual process of it. What I'm doing here, we can go over these nodes in particular in more detail later, but what I'm doing is I'm transforming this roto, this mask, into something that can be input into there, because currently, if I just put that in, Resolve isn't recognizing it as a mask because there's no transparency. It's just a black and white image. So what I'm doing is creating an alpha channel out of this by putting it into a bitmap node, and then I'm telling it that I want to reference the brightness levels of it to create this black and white image. Now I can connect that to my mask input here, and if I view, let's make sure that works. So now it's going to probably do the opposite of what I wanted to do. See that composite is actually only happening inside where the guy's hands are. So I can easily fix that by clicking on my bitmap here and clicking invert. And now this black and white image is now a transparency saying, hey, apply the merge everywhere that's white and don't apply it everywhere that's black. So now viewing this, I can see, ta-da, I've got my CG element, and I've cut out this guy's hands. So now it's looks like it's being placed on top. And that's not bad. You may be noticing that this pack doesn't match the original. This looks pretty different. We can do something about that. So I have a color correction node that I can add. So I want to do that to affect only the pack so that it matches the rest of my footage. Let's do that. So I'm looking at this, I click on new pack, and the other way I can add a node now is hitting shift space. That brings up a tool selector. And if I know exactly what I need, I can just type it in. So in this case, it's color corrector. So that's selected here. I hit add, and because I had this new pack, that this piece of footage selected, that node will happen directly after that. And now I can adjust the color controls of this piece to match a little bit better. So I can take my gain down, I can balance it a little, just warming it up. And now that's a lot closer than what I had before. So this is before and after, and here's the original. So it's not exact, but it's close. And for a minute of work, not bad. I think this is a good time to look at the node order of things. So if I have this color corrector after this new pack, as I do, then it's only going to affect that piece of footage. So if I turn that off, you see it's only affecting this. If I added this color corrector after everything, you'll notice that it would be affecting the whole image because this color corrector is currently placed after the merge. So these two images have been put together and then they're going into this color corrector. So that's not what I want. If I had this color corrector after my original footage, it applies to everything except that new CG element. So I want to make sure I have this in the correct spot here. And the way I'm connecting that without actually manually connecting everything is I click and drag, then hold down shift, and then drag it into this pipeline until the pipe changes color, and I release. And now it is connected. See if I drag it around, that's going into the input, and the output is going into that merge. So now I can turn that on and off, and I can see what it's doing. Any questions around this so far? I know that's probably a lot for some of you. It's probably not a lot for others of you. So I do want to meet somewhere in the middle, but let me know if there's anything you want me to go over again to make sure you get the general concepts. Otherwise, I'll chug along. So generally, again, what's happening here is we start here and we have an element here, and those two are, being connected, glued together essentially in this merge, and then that's being output here to my media out. So it goes back to the edit page. And then this composite that I've done is being limited by the mask input, this black and white image, so that I can still see his hands through the CG element. So again, compositing in its simplest sense is just putting one thing on top of another and occasionally limiting it with a mask. Now, there is a lot more I can do here. I could create or affect my colors in different ways and figure out a better way to match it so that it's a little more exact, which if I were actually working on this shot, I would spend more time to make sure it matches very well. But we have other things we can get to. So let's do another one. Go back to my edit page here, find another piece of footage that I want to work on. One common thing that happens on a shoot, we just play through this. You can see there's a boom mic in this shot. That happens all the time. And that's not something I want to keep. So we can edit that in Fusion to remove that boom entirely, paint it out. But I guess I should also point out that sometimes you can get away with just doing this. Zooming in a little bit on the edit page, no more problem. Now, your director or DP or you, uh, anyone might say, no, I need that exact framing as it was originally. I don't want to zoom in on the shot. And that's totally fine. But as far as VFX being a method of problem solving, one way of solving a problem is just cropping the image a little bit, zooming in, and now problem is gone. So I'd say that is your first option for fixing this sort of a thing. If you can't do that, we have Fusion. So I'm going to, let's see, Aldo, removing the boom mic. Is that a studio feature or free version of Davinci? It is available in free. The method that I'm going to use is available in the free version. And I think everything that I'm going to cover is also a free thing. There are other tools that allow you to do similar things that are studio only, but what we're doing is available in free version. So I'm going to open up this shot in Fusion again. I just hit Shift 5 on my keyboard to switch to this shot. And now I've got a single viewer open. I see my footage. I can close my media pool because I'm not going to use it. And let me resize this a little bit. As I work in my viewer, I'm moving this around by clicking with my middle mouse button on my mouse. Highly recommend having a 3-button mouse. It makes a lot of things easier with a scroll wheel and that middle click, because I can move this around. I can scroll up and down. I can command scroll to zoom in and out. And that helps me, see details as needed. There we go. And then I can always go back to seeing the whole frame in my viewer by hitting Command F. I can also zoom into 100% with Command 1, and that's Control 1, and Control Zoom on Windows. I'm on a Mac. And then Command 2 or Control 2 is to view it at 200%. You also have those controls over here in the corner of the viewer, where I can set this to be 100%, or I can set it to fit, and see that whole frame there. So, couple things to notice about this shot is, one, there's a boom. It falls in this area most of the time. And two, the camera's moving a little bit. So we're going to need to track our shot, the motion of a piece of it, so that we can paint out this area without having it stick in a way that looks unrealistic. If this was just a static shot, all we would need to do is we could paint out this area or replace this area with this part of the frame where there is no boom. But because it moves, we'll need to do a little bit more work. So what we're essentially going to do is freeze this part of the frame and then apply that back on top of our footage throughout the whole frame so that that area is never has a boom coming into it. So I have a node that I'm going to add, and that is called time speed. And if I connect my media in to there, and I set my speed to 0, that means it's freezing a frame. So if I hit play, it's actually just a freeze frame. So that is playing, but if I go back to my media in 1, you can see if I hit play, it plays through. So the time speed has effectively frozen my first frame since speed is set to 0 in here. And what I want to do is have just this area that the boom is in come back over my original footage. So I'm going to add a merge, put that in there, and I'll take my time speed and connect that to the foreground. So now I'm putting my frozen frame over my merge. And currently I've just added this frame over everything. So what I want to do is just limit it to this area where the boom is coming in. So I can do that with a mask that I can draw. So I have a polygon tool here, this one right here. And that didn't apply where I want. But I can just drag this down here, take a look at my original footage to see where that boom is coming in. So I'm going to call it this area right here. And I can draw a shape in that area. And then I need to go back to my first point to connect it. So now if I view that, I see a solid shape. And there we go. I drag that into my mask. And now I actually want the opposite of this, but that's okay. Currently, that got disconnected. So you can see I've cut out that piece, the time speed, with the freeze frame, and now it's moving along with my footage. So you can see that piece is it now looks out of place because it's not moving along with my frame. So that's not what I want, but we have effectively removed the boom, but it looks less realistic now. So I need to make this piece over here that's merged on top move along with my footage, and we're going to do that with a tracker. So I'm going to view my media in my viewer. I'm going to add a planar tracker. And this is a tracker that Fusion has that is good at tracking a flat surface. Now, when I'm tracking, it's going to be ideal that I'm not tracking anything that has people coming into it and something that is in frame most of the time, or all of the time, ideally. So, the whole shape that I drew earlier goes out a little bit. So what I may do is just grab this piece right here, probably that, because that moves the same way that the rest of my footage does. And I want to make sure I'm not getting too far over here that gets covered up by this character. So connect media into the tracker, and I can draw a shape around the area I want to track. And then I need to come to the inspector here and say what I wanted to do. So I'm going to say I want to track this area, not just a series, not just these points, but this area. And the motion type, these options are asking me, is it just going left, right, up, and down? Is it left, right, up, and down, and rotating? Or is it also zooming in and out? And then a fine is, a little more complex camera movement. Perspective is much more of a 3D environment. So the camera is moving around a lot. If I'm just going up, down, left, right, Dutch to either side, translation, rotation, scale is probably a good place to start. It's also less computer intensive, processor intensive than these others. So I'm going to, for now, choose translation, rotation, and scale, see how that works. And I also need to make sure to set the reference time that the tracker should be starting on, which right now is just the first frame, frame 0. So I'm going to click set, and now I can choose this track to end button because I'm on the first frame. I just start here, track to end, and I click on that, and you can see the tracker is moving along with my footage, and it did a pretty good job. Just see that it's sticking to that area, so that's good. Now, I want to take the planar tracker, and I want to take that tracking data and move it into this pipeline over here so that it moves this piece. And in the planar tracker itself, there is this create planar transform button, which when I click on it, it creates this new planar transform. So this is just a piece of footage or a transform node that moves up, down, left, right in accordance with the way that the planar tracker has discovered my footage is doing. So if I connect my time speed into the planar transform and I view that in my viewer, you can see now this whole piece of footage is moving up, down, left, and right just a little bit in the way that my the tracker says it does. And this is the freeze frame moving along with that. So now I need to cut out this piece right here and put that back on top of my merge. You'll notice that if I just now put this over like I had and I view my output, the polygon isn't going to move properly. So let me show you what that looks like. So this polygon isn't moving along with my footage, and because that area that I removed the boom from isn't that big and it's fairly consistent, it's actually okay. It works for this shot. Let me show you. Like that actually works fine. But if my polygon was much smaller, let's find where the boom is. So if I did that, which would work for the boom where it is in the first part of the frame, it wouldn't work later. You can sort of see that mic is poking out from the frame. So your options are to make this polygon big enough, like I had before, or to cut out this piece first and then put it into the planar transform, which is my preference. So I'm going to take this piece of footage, this frozen piece of footage. I've added a merge, so I can just drag this down from here, put it into this pipe. And I'm going to take this polygon, add that in there, but rather than going into the blue mask input, I'm going to put that into my green input here. And what that's done is merge these together, so it's just taken this polygon and added on top. I can actually change what the merge is doing. So I can click on merge, and then I want the apply mode. Oh, sorry, not the apply mode. I want the operator. So right now it's set to over, which is our default, putting background over foreground. But now I want it to be a mask. So I've just created this piece right here that is cut out. So that's the frozen piece right here. And now the planar transform moves it along. So you can see, let's make that a little bigger. See that the planar transform is moving that piece of footage around. And now that's going back on top of my footage in here. So now all I need to do is watch and see if I did it right. So I can click play, go through, and you can see that the mic is still peeking out a little bit. So all that means is that I need to go back to my polygon on the first frame and make that a little bit bigger. Could even make it bigger this way. So now this piece of footage that I have frozen there to remove the mic should cover everything, all parts of the frame that the mic is coming into. So now if I play through, you can see that area is my freeze frame, but it's moving along with the footage, so it looks like it was never there to begin with. Now, this shape here is fairly, it's a hard line over here, and for this piece of footage, it's not really a problem, but others, if you're adding an element, it might not blend perfectly. So what I can also do on my polygon controls, I have this soft edge to feather it out a little bit. If I go too much, it starts becoming very transparent around here, and that won't work. But if I just had a little bit of soft edge, I can feather those edges there, which usually helps a piece like this blend in. So now if I go to that merge, I'm not seeing a difference because this footage is fairly consistent throughout, but it does often help to do that. Aldo is asking, if the mic was there from beginning to end, would you still be able to remove the mic and replace the background via this method? So essentially, yes. Here's how I would do it if the mic is there the whole time. It's almost exactly the same, except there's one node difference. So I would freeze a frame. Let's say it's the same frame that I'm freezing. Or, you know what? Let's find a frame that the mic is in. Let's say that frame right there. So I would freeze that frame. And then what I could do is add a paint node. So now it starts to get a little bit like Photoshop, where what I'd want to do is I have this in my paint node, I have this clone option. So now I could, if I zoom in here, I could start to clone an area or clone this and then start to paint out this mic. And I'm going to do a very quick and bad job. Not that bad. So now I've cloned that out, and that piece is frozen. And so now would composite that piece that I've painted back over, which is essentially what I have here now. So same process, it's just a matter of having that paint node so I can clone out one frame and then freeze that and put it over everything else. And depending on how you set up your brushes, you might actually do the paint first on node 1 and then do the time speed to freeze that frame you painted. Let me go back to how I had this before. So again, just like our first example, let me just show you the overall journey that our image is going through. Is that, we start with our original footage, and then we create a new piece here with this frozen bit of frame, and that's just coming back on top of our original footage with this merge. So, and this will be true for our other examples as well, but most of what we do is just start with original footage, either generate a piece, create a piece, paint a piece, or bring in a new piece of footage, and then merge that on top of our original footage. And then here we have this planar tracker, which we wanted to be referencing the original media, but it doesn't have to be connected because that motion is being applied in this planar transform. Cool. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat or unmute yourself and just barge into the conversation. That's totally cool too. Any more questions about this piece? Otherwise, we can move on to another example. Also, Sean, how am I doing so far? How's this different from what you normally do? Would love to know if you're still there.
I am. It's great. Yeah, it's pretty similar. Yeah, the UI's it's just very slightly changed, but the workflow's still the same. The nodes basically look the same. So yeah, it's great.
Cool, yeah. And would you use a different method generally for if you're a nuke or anything like that for grabbing your like a freezing a frame or painting and then merging that over, or is that pretty much the same process?
Nope, same process.
Cool.
Everybody has their own slight little different ways. I mean, I like to say there's as many ways as there are artists, but it's basically the same thing. Take a clean plate, stick it over there, track it in, good to go.
Awesome. Thanks.
No problem.
All right. Let's do more. We had a couple people who say they were working on sci-fi films, so let's do something a little sci-fi. I've got an astronaut, and he's not, unfortunately, on the moon or on Mars. We couldn't afford that space trip, so we shot on a green screen. Much cheaper than actually going into space for now. So let's see what we can do about that. I'm here. I've got my playhead over that clip, and I'm either going to click on Fusion or hit Shift 5 and go into Fusion. And let's view this in my viewer. All right, so now what I want to do, I need to do a couple things. And sometimes, as things start to get more complex, I like to make notes to myself here. So I have a sticky note effect. So if I can go here, go to Tools, I can search for it, note, or I can do what I did before with hitting Shift Space and typing note, and I have this sticky note. I'm going to add that, and this is a note that lives in this node flow here. And if I double click on it, I can just start typing and say, this is going to be hard. Or maybe it's going to be easy. But what I like to use this for is writing notes of like what needs to be done. So let's watch through. So, okay, I see I want to remove green screen. I also know that, this whole thing is not green. So if I remove that, I'm going to keep all this other stuff. I have a couple of tracking markers. I have a black wall. I have white wall here, some lights in there. And I know I don't want that to poke through. So I can say, get rid of equipment, let's say. And then, of course, I don't want it to remain a transparent background, but I want, a different planet or some sort of background to be there. So add in background, and then I want it all to match together. So I might say, grade to match, so that my background and foreground elements look like they're in the same world. This is optional, but there's no uh, there's no extra points from memorizing exactly what needs to be done. Giving yourself a little checklist is often a nice way to work, especially if you're working on a shot that requires more than a few hours of work and you're going to be coming back to it over a series of days or weeks. Then okay, I did the things I planned to do. So it's a good idea to think through a shot first, make some notes, or at least do the thinking, even if you don't make the notes. But I like to make the notes just so I'm sure I'm not forgetting anything important. And I only have my green screen footage in here, so let's bring in a background from my media pool. And I've got this picture right here. It's just a still image, and that's kind of cool. What I'm actually going to be using is more so this section of it. And this is a pretty big image. You can see if I put this into the viewer, this is almost 4K, about 4K of an image, whereas my original footage is 1080p. So I'm just going to keep that in here for now, and let's label these just so I know what they are. So I'm gonna can label this footage, right click, rename, and I'll call this, let's call this planet, even though it's Earth, because there's a rainbow. And the other thing I need to think about here is the order that these are going to go in. So technically, this is going to be a foreground element because this happens, this is in front, and then my planet is the background. So I could change the order of these, and this doesn't change what is actually happening at the image. It just might help me think about it. And we can talk about why we might or might not want to do it this way. But for now, let's do it this way. So I'm going to, in this case, for this example, merge the footage over the planet. The first thing I need to do is change the size of this because it's huge, so it's not going to match with the footage. If I did that, put the footage over the planet, you can see that all I've got is, a small rectangle here inside a much larger rectangle of the background. It's not what I want. I want this background to be the same size as my footage so that it's easier to put together. So the way I'm going to do that, take my planet and I'm going to add a crop node. And by default, already that has changed the size of this image to match the dimensions of my footage just because of how it's been brought in to resolve. If it didn't do that, I can adjust the size right here in the inspector of the crop node. And you can see it's also cropped out a bunch of the image. We started with all that, and we've just changed what's in there. And it's grabbed that piece. If that's not what I want in the background, I can also, after the planet, add a transform node. So a transform node just lets you move stuff around, either make it bigger, smaller, or move it. So I can now adjust the center parameters here. I can change the size of it. So if what I want is maybe that, let's make this a little bit bigger, just so I get those mountains in the background, and that's it. There we go. Now I can merge the footage over the background, and they at least now are the same size. I'll connect this to the media out. Now I need to get rid of the green, make that transparent, and then get rid of this other stuff so that only my guy here is coming through and is being placed over my background. Now, we're going to talk about keying. So you may have heard the term keying or chroma keying, referring to removing a green screen. Basically, all that is saying, identifying a number of pixels based on a color value or a brightness value or any parameter like that, and saying, hey, do something with it. In this case, turn it transparent. So after my footage node here, I'm going to add a delta keyer. This is Fusion's advanced keyer, great for removing green or blue screens or just a generally solid color. And let's take a look at that. First thing I'm going to want to do is select the color I want to remove. Now, by default, I have a bunch of different things going on over here. I have this first tab in my Delta Keyer inspector, and there's a background color selector. So right now that's set to gray. I can grab this eyedropper, and as soon as I'm clicking and dragging, as soon as I bring that into the viewer, it starts to sample a color, and immediately it is making everything that is close to that color transparent. So to get the cleanest key, I don't need to do anything up here. You can see things are changing slightly. I want to usually get something that is closer to my subject, which means that the values that I'm grabbing are going to be most accurate because I can throw everything out that's outside of a certain area. So I'm going to grab that. And let's do that there. Now, one easy way to view what I've done, what my matte is going to look like. We looked at a matte before of a black and white image saying what stays and what goes. So directly in my Delta keyer, I can look at, in this drop down for view mode, I can look at my matte. And you can see some things are black, some things are white. Now, I want the things I want to keep, in this case, the astronaut, to be totally white and everything around him, immediately around him, to be black. So I can go to my matte tab here and change my threshold parameters and just drag those around so it makes the dark parts darker. And then if I drag the white point here, that's going to make the light parts lighter. And what I'm really looking for is just a really good edge shape. This stuff doesn't matter because I'm going to throw that away shortly. This doesn't really matter. I can cut that out. But I want to make sure I don't have any holes like this in here. And I don't have any, I don't know if you can see that, but these shapes, at least not close to my astronaut here. So I can just keep adjusting these parameters until I fill those holes. And for now, that's looking pretty good. And now I can set my view mode back to final result so I can see my guy here. And now if I look at what I've done, just look at media out in the viewer, you can see I've got my astronaut over my background. Edge is not looking too bad, but I have these parts of the original footage right here. All this equipment. Let's get rid of that. So I've got something called, I have another input in this Delta keyer called garbage matte. And basically what that does is it allows me to define an area with a polygon or another shape and say everything inside that is garbage. So let's add a polygon and I can draw a shape. And I have a couple other inputs here in the Delta keyer. So if I hover over any of these inputs, I'll get a little pop-up that says, that's the garbage matte. This is a clean plate. That is a solid matte. And that's my blue effect mask, which we're not going to use. If I dragged this polygon and put it into my effect mask, you'll see what I've done is I'm now telling the Delta keyer to only apply inside of this shape I've drawn. That is not what I want. What I want to do is have that go into the garbage matte, which is down here. And if I don't remember, what colors these are and all that, I don't need to keep hovering over this. What I can do is right click and drag on this output and then hover over my Delta keyer, release, and now it gives me this menu of saying which input would you like to connect that to. So in this case, I want garbage matte. And all that stuff that was over here, the Delta keyer took out the trash. Because I said everything that is inside there is garbage, get rid of it. Now I've got other stuff over here, so I could create another shape and draw that around here. But something I find a little easier to do, depending on the shot, is instead of defining the garbage, I say, let's define what I want to keep and then invert it. Let me show you what I mean. So this polygon right here is just the black and white image, everything that's white, saying throw that out. So I'm going to delete that. Let's draw a new one. And let's look at this footage again. So now I can just draw around my guy here and say, that's inside the area I want to keep. Looks like he moves. So go back to making this a bit bigger. Make sure he stays within there. That'll do. And so now, if I right click on that, drag it over my Delta keyer, choose garbage matte, it's taking that guy out. It's the opposite of what I want. Because this mask right here is saying everything inside it is garbage. So all I need to do to fix that is click on my polygon shape here and click invert, and now it'll be the exact opposite of what it's been doing. So now it gets rid of everything outside of that shape. So this is the shape now. And now the Delta keyer is getting rid of everything outside of it. And I've got my guy. He's on the planet. And that is a lot further along than what I started here. So thus far, we've created, our background from that picture. We've cropped it to a size and resized it, moved it around so we get the background we want. We took our footage, we identified the green and made that transparent, and then had our garbage matte to get rid of all of the stuff that we didn't want out here. Merge it together. And let's take a look at our notes and see what we've done. So remove green screen, check. Get rid of equipment, check. Add in background, check. Grade to match, So similar to what we did with the first example where we graded it to match better, we can do a couple things to make sure our background matches our foreground better. So let's say I want this guy to be on Mars. So first thing I want to do, I'll grade the background. So that needs to happen before the merge in this area right over here, so that I'm only affecting the background. And this could actually be anywhere. It could be after the planet, could be the transform, could be after the crop. It can be anywhere. It just has to happen before the merge. I'm going to do it after the crop. So I've added a color corrector. And now you can see whatever I do, it's only going to affect the background and not my astronaut here because it's happening before the merge. So if I want this to be a little more Mars-ish, maybe do that, or maybe actually take out some of my saturation so I'm not getting much of a blue sky. Make that pretty red, reddish, orangish. That'll do for now. And now I want this guy to match. I could also, assuming that everything is already matched, I could just put this color correction after everything. And if I view that, you can see it's actually graded everything together. And that can totally work, assuming these two pieces of footage already match pretty well. And I would say that might work, except that the lighting is going to be different between them. So maybe what I do instead is I have this correction that goes after everything, but I also have one that happens just on the background where I, for example, change the brightness values. So I'm bringing my gain down, see how that looks. Maybe affect the black point, up or down, things like that. And I could, if I wanted to, adjust that further with the color. So that is at least better. This doesn't work exactly because I see clouds up here and there's no clouds on Mars. So maybe we pretend this is a different planet. But that is generally how I might approach this shot. At least in the simplest way possible that Fusion will allow, is resizing my background over here, doing a little color correction as necessary, and then taking my footage, creating transparent pixels so that it can be applied over this background that I've created. Any questions around what I've done with this key or any of these shapes?
I have a quick question, Gedaly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, are there any pitfalls to doing color grading here, and then when you give the entire project over to your colorist and they're doing their grade, any issues there?
Yeah, so I guess I should uh, specify that these color operations that I'm doing are not meant to be the color grade that is like the final color grade of the project. This is just so that all elements within my shot match. My goal in VFX is to make it look like we went to this planet or this location and everything was shot that way. So it should all look like one cohesive piece of footage. Then what the colorist is going to do is add more of anything that is needed, really, which might be adjusting the whole image down creatively. It could be adding your look overall. So if you're working as a part of a team and you're just doing these VFX, I would not want to then have a color corrector here where I'm, adding a look and creating contrasts like, this is like to taste what I want, or, doing all sorts of crazy things that are more of a creative grade. Like there is creativity to this, but my goal here with these color operations is make this look like one cohesive shot as if it was shot that way.
Awesome,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, and there is no this is also a conversation to have with either the team or the colorist, or maybe for some projects it could be all you. So it really depends on what you're doing. There are also ways, a lot of projects will have a colorist who wants control over the foreground and background, um, so that they can grade things differently to match if their overall look changes the way things did, and that's not how you were viewing it. Um, and if it is all you, or if it's all in Resolve, there's actually a way we can do that very easily. I'll show that off. So, I've got my background and foreground that are being affected that I can affect separately here in Fusion. Now, by default, if I just open this shot in the color page and I just grade the whole thing, I'm only treating it as one shot. It's all happening together. But I can take my alpha channel or take the matte out of Fusion and into the color page so that I have more control over that later. For example, I'm going to add another media out. So by default, this media out one, that goes back to the edit page, color page, etc. This media out two isn't going to do anything by default, but I can make it do that. So I'm going to export or take the output of the delta key here into the media out two. So if I view this in my viewer, you can see I've got just my guy here. So I'm sending all of this, the delta key here into my composite. That turns into a single image. And then I'm also taking just the foreground footage, putting that into another media out. Now, when I go into the color page, by default, same thing. This is one image, but what I can do is I can right click in my node area here, add a source, and you see this other source showed up here. If I hover over the first one, it's not going to say anything, but the second one, I think my mouse is moving and it won't do it, but it's supposed to. I think it's because of the presenter mouse thing I have, but it should say media out too. And I can take the output of that, so I just drag from there into, let's say, this transparency, the alpha channel input, the blue triangle of my node here. And now, if I start grading, you see it's only affecting the astronaut. And if I want to do the opposite of that and just grade the background, let's say in a different node, I can click on this and add a node. add node, add outside, and now this node is going to do the opposite. So now that one is just grading the background. Obviously that looks awful, but that's just to demonstrate that I have pure control over my foreground and background separately because I have set that output from Fusion into the color page. So now I can do those adjustments as I so choose. So this is one of those advantages of working in Resolve for a whole project is that you have that sort of um, flexibility, and you don't need to have a VFX artist export a matte for you to bring into the color page if you really need that control. Then again, if it is all you in the same project, you can just go back to the Fusion page and change what you've done here. And there you go. Cool. Flying right along. So,
I have one more
yeah, go ahead.
quick question about this. So right now the astronaut's super crisp. The background, given how far away it is, feeling super crisp. Is there a specific blur that you would recommend to replicate the actual like depth of field of a lens, or is it just kind of, all blurs are kind of equal in Fusion?
Yeah, good question. There's a couple options. Actually, there's a lot of options. So I'm just going to go after this color and I'm going to type blur and just see a couple of things we have. There is a normal blur. There are blurs. This is a depth blur, which is based on, how a depth of field sort of a thing. There's Gaussian blur, lens blur is one that's actually my favorite for that. That is a studio only feature. But if I take that lens blur and I just start adjusting it, it's meant to be more like camera blur, where you see, you can do the shape, change the shape of your aperture, change the blur size, the curvature of the blades within the camera, so that is able to sort of mimic what a camera is doing. There's also, I believe this is in the free version, a defocus, and that will do something very similar, where I can change the size of, this is the idea of this is it should do sort of like what a lens is doing, and then it changes how out of focus it is. I think the lens blur one is a little bit more accurate, but it's studio only. Defocus, pretty sure, is available in the free version, and that is good enough for most things. I tend to use that as well. I think it's also a little less processor intensive. But yeah, I'd go about it using one of those, and you can also just, use the normal blur and see how far that gets you. Um, depending on the shot, that might work just fine. So that's before and after. And of course, you can add different amounts of blur to each part of this. So I could blur, for example, he starts further back. I could have him move into focus by keyframing that blur if I wanted to. Let's just do a defocus. If I wanted him to start blurry, probably need to do the same thing to my background to start, and then I could have set a keyframe here for this defocus size, and then at the end set another keyframe here. We haven't talked about this animation yet, but ultimately what I'm doing is setting a keyframe, hitting this diamond icon, and then anytime I do that, that sets a keyframe. So at the first frame, it's set to 2. I go to the last frame, set that to 0, and then over time, this guy is slowly going to come into focus. So there's a couple options for making things go in and out of focus as needed. Quick note on making sure things play back smoothly. Um, depending on how big the footage is, what sort of effects you're doing, you may notice your machine start to slow down. there is by default a high quality processing mode that is active. So if I right click in this toolbar, not on my player controls, but next to it, I can right click and I see I have some of these options here. So I can uncheck high quality, and that will increase my speed of playback because it's not trying to render absolutely everything at full resolution, full quality. Most of the time, you're not going to notice a big difference or any difference. It just depends on what your how big your footage is and how much you're zoomed in. There is a difference, but often it's better to work with less lag. So I tend to have that unchecked a lot of the time. And also, if things are animated, moving around a lot, you may have added motion blur. We haven't for this shot, but if you did and didn't want those to show up in the viewer, you could uncheck motion blur. And that would also help your playback speed as you're working through your composite here. All right. Shall we do another? If you have other questions, just feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Let's do one more. So I've got a shot here, and this is still on the subject of keying, but now we're not keying a green screen, but we're going to key a sky and replace that with another sky that may look a little bit better, or at least is closer to the sky that the director wanted. So here we go. I've got my shot here. Let's play through and let's see what's happening. I can see that the shot is moving a bit. And ultimately, the sky is pretty blown out. It's very bright, and the director wants there to be clouds in the sky. And let's give them clouds. So this is a very similar process in that I'm going to take a background or add a new background and then key the sky. But rather than saying choose green, I'm going to say choose levels that are above a certain brightness level and then make those transparent. So let's label this node footage. I'll go to my media pool and I can drag in actually the same background sky that I used before. I'm just going to use a different part of the sky. So before we were using that section right here, I think now we'll use something like this. So we can do the same thing we did before with a transform and a crop. And I'll use that transform. Rather than doing it in the inspector like I did before, I can actually just grab the center control over here and just drag that around. So there's this in a node here. If I have this active in my viewer, I have my controls. Lets me just move this around. So now I've got this sky and I want to put that over here. So let's disconnect that and I can take my footage and composite it over my background. So you can see that I have my footage over my background. Now what I want to do is just make that part transparent. So before we use Delta Keyer, because that was good for grabbing colors, I've got another tool called Luma Keyer. And immediately that has done something. It's the opposite of what I want, but at least I know it's doing something. So the Luma Keyer is good for grabbing brightness values. So it's very easy. Just say anything that's brighter than this level, grab that. So first thing I want to do is I can see that it's leaving my high brightness values, and then things that are dark, it's making transparent. You can see that my sky is coming through. Immediately, I just want to click on the invert button here and do the opposite. So this isn't a great view at the moment, but I at least know it's doing something close to what I want. And it's going to be easier for me to work and get a good edge here by viewing my alpha channel directly, which is the transparency that I'm creating. So let me view the alpha or view the luma keyer in my viewer here. So I clicked on it, hit 1 on the keyboard, and then I'm going to click up here on my viewer channel selector. So I can view all the color channels. I can also view just red, green, or blue channels here. That shows me that there. But what I want to take a look at is this alpha channel. So that's the transparency that I'm creating. So just like we did before creating the matte on the chroma keyer, with the delta keyer, I can make sure that this area is black and then this area is mostly white. It's not going to be perfect, but what I do want to be perfect is the sky. So let me just drag these values up. And if I go too far, you can see that I'm creating too far. It's getting into the sky, so I don't want to go that far. I want to make sure my sky remains black, and then I drag this value down so all the black is black. And I can crunch that quite a bit in here because mostly what I care about is getting a good sky. I have a bunch of pieces in here that will be holes that need to be filled in, but we can do that using another method. What I really care about is getting this edge. We'll just try to get that as good as I can with as few holes as possible. I think that's as good as I can get it without taking too much time. And now if I look at another node, you can see now it's all white because I'm still looking at my alpha channel. So I can just click on this here, view my color channel. Let's connect that to the media out. And you see I've got my new sky coming through. I've got some holes in my characters here because I have these transparent areas. That's because in my original footage, there's some very bright areas in here, which the luma key is grabbing. Similar to what we did with the delta keyer, where we had a garbage matte saying everything inside is garbage. Luma keyer has a solid matte. It has a garbage matte, but it also has a solid matte. So I could use another shape to say, hey, everything inside of this shape, which will be all in here, I want that to be solid. So let's do that. So I've got this here. I'm going to, and I'm currently just looking at my footage rather than the composite or luma keyer, just so I can easily draw around here. So I'm going to add a polygon and I'll just draw a very basic shape. Go here. I'm going to ignore my talent for a moment because they move around more than everything else does. So I'm going to just draw this shape here and then I'll right click on the output there, drag that into the solid matte area. And now if I view my composite, you can see that these holes got filled in. So let me undo that. You can see that I'm seeing my sky poke through in these areas that are transparent, but now I'm saying, hey, everything that's inside this shape, if I connect it to the solid matte, now everything inside that shape is solid. And you can see that piece of my mask is actually overlapping the sky there, so I can draw a new point and make sure that that's not the case. And you can see there's still holes coming through in the talent's face right here. So what I can do is actually create another mask and connect that to this polygon. And the reason I would do that is because the land tends to stay fairly static, whereas my talent here moves around. So I'm going to need to animate or rotoscope that mask to follow their faces. And I can do that fairly quickly by adding a polygon. If I just view my footage here, I can draw a shape, and it should just do quick and dirty, staying within the bounds of her head, making sure I'm grabbing those bright spots. And then in order to animate this, I can just go through a few frames highlight all points. I hit Shift A to do that, and then I drag them all over and just keep going every few frames. I don't have to do this every frame. I'm going about every 10 frames or so, and this is fairly quick and dirty. But just to show you the general process of how this might work. So now, if I play through, you can see it's not perfect, but that shape is moving along with her face. And I should go, through more of these frames just so that it's actually following much more closely. But we don't have too much time, so I just want to show the general process of how I might do that. And again, that was creating a polygon, so drawing a shape, and then I just move some frames forward and then move that. And if I just click in my viewer and hit Shift A, that selects all points. I can also click and drag to lasso them all, and then grab a single point. And because they're all selected, it just moves all of them. And then I just keep going 2 more frames, and you can see I have these little subtle white marks here that show where the keyframes are that are automatically created when I animate a polygon, or when I move a polygon, I should say. So if I'm on this frame and then I move about 10 frames forward and I adjust the size of all this, it has automatically created a new keyframe there. So I can just keep going through and doing the same thing. And that's fairly animated, fairly well animated, or at least for 3 minutes of work. And then what I can do is, so I have this polygon, and now this one of the face I drew, I just drag that output, the square there, into the blue input of the polygon, and that combines those masks. And now I have a solid mask that includes both the land and that actress's face, so that when I'm looking at my Luma here, I not only don't have holes in the area here, but also her face that is covered up as well. So that's without the solid matte. I have these holes that are transparent, and now putting that back in, I've closed those transparent areas. And I would also want to do this for this guy here, because I have these areas of his head that overlap the land. But I'm not going to do that right now, because we only have a few minutes left. So now if I view my merge here, you can see I've got my sky, I've got the solid matte, which is good enough for now. And you'll notice, the edges here are pretty jagged. It's covering the land nicely, but there's a bit of a halo around it, because I grabbed some pixels of that bright original footage before. So we have some tools in our Luma keyer here to affect our matte that we've created. So what I want to do is make sure that I might want to contract the size of the edges of that a little bit and also blur it so it's not so jagged. So I've got a blur control here, and I have a contract expand control here. So I can first start blurring that a little bit, and it's feathering it out in a way that is softer. So that's a helpful place to start. But now it's going even further than it did before. So then now I can take that contract expand slider and draw it down here. And it's gone from there to there. And that's much better. And ideally I should go around and make sure that's applying well to everything. So that's pretty good for a quick and dirty version. You can see our guy here might need a little more work. So we can try those expand controls. We can try adjusting those blur controls slightly. And we also may need to just create a different, another matte around him specifically because of that hair detail. Or, just make sure our solid matte is covering him in a different way. So it just depends on the shot. Overall, I want to make sure that at least for the edge of the land here, I've got the blur and the contract expand controls getting pretty good, and that's not bad. But now we see same thing as before. We need to do a little bit with our background so that it matches better. This is what we shot, and with the background like this, it doesn't look realistic because the the reflections, the halos, the colors of that sky versus what we have in our actual footage here, they're not quite right. So I will want to grade the background to match a little bit better. So I could take this crop or go after the crop, add a color corrector, and I'll probably want to make it brighter so that it's brighter than what we have, or so that it's closer to our original footage here. So this color corrector, I'll adjust some things here, make it brighter. This is going to be adjust some saturation and color, and it's at least closer. So this is where we started, and here's where we are after a few seconds of noodling around with some sliders. Do a little bit more. And this is the kind of thing that you can just fiddle with until you get it where you want it, but that is, I'd say, good for what I want to do for now. Any questions around this shot or this process? Let me know. Unmute or put it in the chat. Just to overview what we've done again. Just like all the other shots, we've got a background and we've got a foreground and we're putting it all together. So the merge is doing the work here of, having an image and putting one on top of the other. So regardless of what your shot is doing, at some point you're putting something over something else, and then you're affecting it in various ways. So like we have this footage, and then we created transparency using the Luma key. For the green screen shot, we created transparency using the Delta keyer, and then we are affecting where that transparency is being applied with, in this case, the solid matte, saying, hey, I want all this area to be solid. And for the green screen shot, we were saying, I want, those areas to be taken out entirely because we had equipment in the shot.
Gedaly, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there any reason that, like how you manually move the polygon over the actress's face, that you would choose that method over using the planar tracker node?
Yeah. It depends on the shot. So if it's going to be fairly quick, and if there's complex movement of a subject that's turning and stuff like that, I might just do the roto manually. Roto meaning, outlining the shape. The other thing I could do is I could use a tracker or the planar tracker and animate, a shape. So let me just go through doing that. For this shot, it wouldn't be too difficult. Actually, let me do a new polygon. So I can, define an area over here as my shape. And so that's my roto that I'll use for the solid mask. And then I could, if I wanted to, use a number of different trackers. What I might actually use for this shot, if you had studio version, is just the regular tracker, and then it has IntelliTrack, which is very good at just tracking a point. So I might put that, for example, over her eye or something like that. And then I put my footage into that tracker, go over here, and then just say, well, let's see what happens. If I just track, that followed very nicely. And then all I need to do is to get that polygon to move along with that tracker. So I could say, hey, polygon, so this center moves the shape around. I could animate that center and say, hey, center, connect to tracker. And it would be unsteady position. And now this moves around. And so now I can connect this to the solid mask, solid matte. And so, now that shape is moving along. You see it's not perfect only because what's actually happening is the shape or like her in frame is a different size. So I might also want to animate this mask. Or I can try a different tracker like the planar tracker and see if it will track the surface to grow and shrink. So because her face is changing size in frame, either the tracker or the polygon will need to adjust for that. So this is one reason why it's, especially because it's a short shot, why doing the roto manually wouldn't be that big a deal to me, because I could do that in a couple minutes. I could also use the planar tracker. So let me disconnect that tracker. And just to show you a different method here, also because that IntelliTrack is only available in the studio version. So let's try the planar tracker to track her face. Bring the footage into my planar tracker. Let's draw an area. Let's also try that area right there. It might not be enough, but we'll see what happens. And I want translation, rotation, scale. And let's see what happens. I think that works. Okay. Let's see. So now if I take a planar transform from that, I can put my polygon into the background of the planar transform. And now if I look at that, that's moving along. And you see because the planar transform, like this tracker changed the size, like it was tracking the size of the object in frame. The planar transform will do that to this shape as well. So it's actually getting bigger and smaller. So this might work better. And now, unfortunately, I need an extra node because this won't be recognized as a matte, I think. It goes in, oh, it might. So the solid mask, oh, that did work. Great. So now I have that. And I might just need to adjust my shape because I really only need that on this side of the frame. So I could change those points. And that was just the first frame because that's where I drew my shape. It's going into the planar transform that is moving it along. And let's see how that works. So it ends up poking out in a couple frames, like here, but ultimately, that's doing a pretty good job. So the short answer is depends on the shot, depends on how much work is needed. Sometimes getting the tracker and the shape to move along the way you want in a short shot like this doesn't save that much time over just doing the roto manually. But if you have a more complex shot and there's a lot of tracking to do and you only want to adjust, a polygon in a couple frames, then tracker is a great place to start. It ultimately depends on what the shot is doing and how much work you'll need to do on it. And the only way to know is to try the options or to have enough experience where you just know based on what the footage is doing which method to use. Cool. And let me bring this polygon back here so we have our full solid matte. Ah, this is where we needed the extra node. So because the planar transform uh, going out into the solid matte is fine because this is a black and white image. But if I tried to connect, this to my other solid matte, um, this polygon mask input doesn't identify the output of this as a mask. So all I need to do is add a bitmap. So this needs to go into the bitmap. And now that should work. So I can connect this bitmap. So the bitmap just takes whatever input and says, hey, create a mask out of it. And now that should be able to go into this polygon. So now I have my combined masks to use as my solid matte. And now I can put that into the solid matte for this shot. And there we go. Pretty good. And I think that looks better. So you can see that there may be more work we could do based on refining the edge, especially around the talent's head over here. We may want to defocus this background. If those clouds are too sharp, we could try or defocus. And that did a lot. Let's try that over here. I can turn on and off that node to see how I like it by clicking on it and pressing this toggle button right here, or I can hit Command P for pass through. Turn that on and off and see if I like what I did. Turn that down. Starting to get pretty subtle. The other thing I should do on this shot is, you know, a normal frame of footage has some grain on it. So if I zoomed in a lot, I don't know if you could actually see this over zoom, but there should be some chattering with some noise that's just normal with what happens when you shoot something. So I could also add some noise to this background. And for now, I'll just add it here. I have a film grain node, so I'll just add that in there. And you can see I've added some grain there. If I play through, it's way too much, but I can at least scale that down, change the size, change the strength. A few parameters here. Let me actually increase the size just so it's more likely to come through over zoom. So now if I do that, you can at least see there's motion in here. It does help that image look more realistic. I would do that subtler in a shot normally, but at least that's there. So I hope you can sort of see that through zoom. All right. So I think, well, we've basically got 4 minutes left. So let's do any final questions about anything you want to know about VFX, and I'll see if I can answer. I'll try to answer as best I can in the remaining time we have. Um,
I've got a really super nitpicky one for this
yeah,
one. So there's some camera motion on this shot, and
yes,
the clouds in the background don't really track.
correct.
Is there a way to track easily off a shot like this where there's not like a very clear like hard edge to like really latch onto?
Yeah, so there, well, there are a few edges that we can track. So basically, just like we were tracking the face before, we just need to find a few pieces we want to track. So we could, add a tracker and we want our footage to go into that. And we could use the IntelliTracker. We could just use the normal point tracker, which is available in the free version. And all we need to do is find some pieces that remain consistent. So, for example, this pattern right here, is fairly static and isn't covered up by any of our talent. Same thing, we could find like a piece over here, maybe something over here. And to get a good track, we should probably get 3 points, maybe more if we can. And then what we do is just apply the tracker data from that tracker to our background. So put that over here. And then the clouds will move in a way that is consistent with our footage. So not quite time to go through that fully, but ultimately I would take my footage into a tracker, grab a couple points that are, there consistently. I should start this on the first frame just so it's easy. And I might do something. I'll try to find a point or pattern that has a fair amount of contrast that stays in frame. So that one might work. Hard to tell. But then could track that and then bring this tracker over here, or I can do like I did on the other one and add a transform and apply that track data. For example, transform to that, and I can animate the center, modify it with the connect to, and that would be tracker 2, and the unsteady position is what it outputs after I have tracked the points. And so then the clouds are going to move in a way that is consistent with my footage.
Nice, thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, Sean, I have a question for you. Do you have any thoughts about using the back, like the sky, as the background, or would you actually use that as a foreground and put it on top? What's your preferred method?
I think my preferred method is use it as a background.
Cool. I've
That's
heard different
generally,
thoughts on that, so I was just curious what your
yeah.
take was.
Either way works, really. I mean, it kind of amounts to the same thing, but it just makes more sense in my brain that it would be the background, right?
Yeah.
Because it's behind them, so.
Right. Yeah, I tend to show it that way because that's how Fusion wants to work. Cool. So just to quickly go over again, some of what we've done. This one has started to be a little more complex, but let's move this stuff out of there. But you can see that, and I'll move that out because we were using the film grain. Ultimately, what we've done, we start with a background, move it around, defocus, crop, get it to the size we want, color grade it, add some grain. So that's all happening to this background here. We have some footage that we have added transparency, or I guess taken away pixels from with transparency. And then put that on top of our background here with this merge. So everything we've done, a lot of what we've done is have a background, we have a foreground, we affect that in some way, or affect both of them in some way, and we put them over each other using a merge. And as long as it goes into the media out, we'll see the results of that back in the edit page or in the color page, and then anything we do can happen after that. Any other questions about Fusion in general, DaVinci Resolve overall, VFX process, projects you've got coming up? Put it in the chat or unmute and let me know. Nothing. All right. Everyone's brain is full. So that's the time we've got today. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate you taking some time to hang out and geek out about VFX and learn some things that DaVinci Resolve can do. What else do I want to say? If you need anything, want to learn more stuff, I have a website. That's dvresolve.com. Make that a little bit smaller. So that is tutorials that I have curated from around the internet and posted there. And then I also occasionally do some original courses or webinars and stuff like that. And there's also a contact page on there if you want to have something go straight to me if you have another question about doing private training or questions about Resolve that you need some things you need to know for an upcoming production. Let me know. That's a good way to learn more or to get in contact with me. If you want more of these, Blackmagic Collective, we'll let the info at blackmagiccollective.com. Just feel free to email, say whether you liked it or if there's another topic you want. We've covered editing, color grading, stuff like that in the past. So feel free to request topics. Thank you to Blackmagic Design, who's actually sponsored us doing this because they make Resolve and it's great and I like it. On that note, thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you again in a future one. And have a good rest of your day.
Thanks. That was really fun.
Glad you enjoyed it. Talk to you later.
See ya.